So that's what's called the Vancouver model. They call it flying cash. Some call it hawala in Middle Eastern cultures. You have made the deal to get paid out in another jurisdiction, pay back that gangster who maintains bank accounts in both jurisdictions. And so the cash is laundered for the person exporting the capital, and the drug dealers on both sides can get the money moving in a circle between those countries.
Why is President Trump going after Justin Trudeau and Canada? Well, our guest this week might have the answer. This is a shocking story about fentanyl distribution, billions of dollars in money laundering, the connection between Chinese and Mexican drug cartels, and ultimately, how the Chinese Communist Party has bribed and influenced their way to the top of Canada's government. If you're an American, you should care deeply about this story. My guest today is Sam Cooper, author of Willful Blindness: How a Criminal Network of Narcos, Tycoons, and Chinese Communist Party Agents Infiltrated the West. I'm Ed D'Agostino, and this is Global Macro Update from Malden Economics. Sam Cooper, it's such an honor to be with you. I can't tell you how just blown away I've been by your book, Willful Blindness. You know, I've been racking my brains as to how to start this because it's such a big, complex story. I think the best way to start is most Americans, most of my audience are Americans, and I think a lot of people were shocked by President Trump going after your Prime Minister Trudeau, and Canada kind of right out of the gate. I contacted a friend, a mutual friend actually, and just said, what do you think's going on here? And he said, I have to think it's all has to do with Sam Cooper's work. And so that's how we ended up here today. Let's think about how to introduce this story. And I guess we just start at the beginning, right? What got you into this story so many years ago?
That takes us right back to British Columbia and myself being a young reporter in Vancouver. Around this time was a year or two after the U.S. subprime crisis, and, being so interested in investment finance as well as a young reporter looking at corruption. I thought Vancouver's real estate prices had zero connection to local incomes. So there had to be something wacky going on with mortgages. And to cut to the chase, years of research later, I said in my book, Willful Blindness, this is not a subprime mortgage crisis. It's a subcrime mortgage crisis issue in Vancouver, because in a nutshell, I was able to confidently establish that 30% of the funds flowing into Vancouver real estate were coming in underground and offshore, mostly from China and Hong Kong. It had tremendous, this money that the people that knew where it was coming from weren't really, fessing up, but it's black money. It comes through underground banking channels. It became known as the Vancouver model of money laundering. And we could talk about that for a long time. That was the first half of my book, how I discovered that Chinese transnational gangsters in cities around the world, very strongly in Vancouver and Toronto, but in Australia, also Boston, New York, for your listeners, San Francisco, Las Vegas. What they have is these basically ancient triad societies, very sophisticated, tightly knit Chinese organized crime that launders criminal cash around the world in very sophisticated ways without it necessarily going through bank transfers. So I discovered at the end of the day that this was connected to, China's influence operations as well. And that brings us to your comment about President Trump at the start. Look, I think there's a lot more going on than just a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico. Mr. Trump and his intelligence point to what the DEA has known for years is Canada, although it is a G7 nation and, has the reputation of a very, strong democracy, has been undermined for years by these foreign financial networks. And so it was shocking to most people that American intelligence and the DEA have the similar concerns about borders in British Columbia, fentanyl networks in British Columbia, that they do in Mexico. And indeed, in fact, the Sinaloa cartel, the Jalisco New Generation are working together with these Chinese international triads very strongly in Vancouver and Toronto. So I do think that I think there's a lot of bombast and art of the deal in what Mr. Trump is saying.
Sure, there always is.
There's also personal issues, I think, with Mr. Trudeau. And I believe there's concerns that Mr. Trudeau hasn't cracked down on foreign interference from China. And networks, I'll tell you this, at the risk of being, a little bit forthright with my investigations, the networks directly associated to funding Mr. Trudeau, I believe, would be involved also in Chinese intelligence and election interference in the United States. And if I know this, which I do, I have to believe Mr. Trump's intelligence does. So, I mean, a lot of directions to go in, but I do think it's a big issue that Mr. Trump is pointing to, and it's going to be an interesting year.
I want to back up a little bit and just talk about sort of the chain of events that you've uncovered, if you will. My assessment, at least the first half of the book, my assessment was it starts with billions of dollars of drug money. This is primarily at this stage, before it was maybe methamphetamine, but now it's clearly fentanyl, right? So it's drug money derived from fentanyl, and the vast majority of this is coming from China. And then, so you take drug money that gets put into what you talked about, the black market and the underground banking system, which I want to get into because it's mind blowing how sophisticated it is. But it goes into this black box, if you will, of money of money movement, and then it gets spit out into Canadian casinos where it gets laundered, if you will. So it's duffel bags. This is mind blowing what you were describing. Duffel bags with millions of dollars of $20 bills wrapped in rubber bands, just bricks of 20s. They go into a casino and they get spit out as a cashier's check. And now that money is laundered. And then it finds its way into the Canadian economy and BC real estate. Is that the right flow?
Absolutely. And, in my mind as an investigator, I timeline things. So you're right. We're in the fentanyl and meth era now. We could talk a lot about how the U.S. government now alleges that China, that is the Chinese Communist Party, is incentivizing methamphetamine and fentanyl and directly involved in its trafficking. But my research started with what I'm talking about, these triads, either in China or Hong Kong. They set up very strongly in Vancouver and Toronto in the 1980s. And as I write in my book, I found the documents that said what it's called the Big Circle Gang had such control over heroin that they could set the prices of heroin trade around the world. Because for your listeners and viewers that, study the history of China and, areas like the Golden Triangle where lawless states come together in Myanmar, Cambodia, etc. The Big Circle Gang, with direct, connections to the Chinese government, has direct controls that heroin trade. So they were pumping those drugs into North America in the 80s and 90s, and they developed so much, in terms of warehouses of cash that they need a good way to launder that money. And it's British Columbia casinos were letting gangsters walk in the door. This is in the 80s. The story advances, but yes, a gangster walks in the door with a satchel of $20 bills. This is drug money from heroin. We're talking the 80s and 90s. The casinos don't stop them. No controls. Like Las Vegas is like the best bank in the world in comparison to what was going on in British Columbia. And so they let the gangsters walk in, launder the money, and it goes into Vancouver real estate. But how it advances and becomes the Vancouver model is what's called junkets. And the key thing here is that, as everyone knows, the Chinese Communist Party only lets citizens from China export 50,000 per year. So what do? The corruption in China is off the charts. Officials can be a gangster and sitting in a local council at the same time, right? And so they make a deal with a gangster in Vancouver and say, I'm going to meet you outside the casino in a parking lot. I get a bag, let's just say 100,000. I gamble, launder my money, and I'm going to pay you back in China through my bank account where my source of funds is. So that's what's called the Vancouver model, right? They call it flying cash. Some call it hawala in Middle Eastern cultures. You have made the deal to get paid out in another jurisdiction, pay back that gangster who maintains bank accounts in both jurisdictions. And so the cash is laundered for the person exporting the capital, and the drug dealers on both sides can get the money moving in a circle between those countries. And the real key here that I would like to add before it gets, so many transaction paths, but these loans, because it's a drug cash loan by, let's just call it the whale gambler from Shanghai, arrives in Vancouver. He gets it went up to, let's say, a $500,000 bag of cash. He secures that loan, which he's going to pay back in China, with a lien on a Vancouver real estate property. So these loans are secured by Vancouver real estate, right? And they were, these drug cash loans were running through Canadian courts. And after decades, a big portion of the city has these drug cash loans on them.
Just to put this into perspective, Vancouver real estate, I mean, it's famously expensive. Is Vancouver, if you're not a Chinese gangster, is Vancouver a place to make great wealth? I mean, is it the equivalent of, say, Silicon Valley in the U.S., where people are making, six figures easily?
It's not at all an economic powerhouse. When I came into Vancouver as a young reporter, people were already calling it a resort for the rich. It wasn't a secret that most of the wealth was from offshore. People were just not able to prove, or maybe they didn't have, the support or courage to say that this had to be coming in through, nefarious and underground means. So, a few data points. The average family income in Vancouver, certainly when I was studying it, around 60,000 to 70,000 Canadian. So,
okay.
Right?
Okay.
Average home price, 1.2 to 1.4 million. And these are not nice homes. These would be rundown properties in bad areas of the city. So you could see that the average, the tax paying Vancouver dwelling Canadian citizen, wherever they're from, could not afford those homes. So they were being funded, through what I'm saying, underground drug banks, and Canadian banks got in on those mortgages and rode the prices higher. So the banks, definitely interface with that underground economy.
So I'm trying to paint a picture for people of what is the impact of all this activity. So, one of the first impacts is middle class people are just priced out of their home, their city. Not to mention you've got a massive criminal element operating in your backyard. So I'm assuming it's more dangerous.
I'll tell you this, you hit the nail on the head. Again, I came into the story as, at that time, a young family man, and I wanted to understand the problems of my generation, that there was such frustration in the city that, you might have gone to the best university in Canada and be, among the elite of your field, and you couldn't afford a home. It was crazy. People were moving out in droves and have been forced out. So, as some of my friends in investing say, when the tax-paying citizen moves out, then the good jobs move out, and the people that don't pay taxes and they're doing the underground banking own all the real estate. There's going to be big problems. But to tie it back into, the criminality, we're talking about the same level of criminality that Donald Trump is concerned about when he points to the Panama Canal. I'll just draw a little picture here. Again, people are shocked about the U.S. government, making threats to retake that important passage. But look, the U.S. military, there's reporting since the 90s, has been concerned that tycoons from Hong Kong that have shipping entities have taken significant control of the Panama Canal, and they are, essentially Chinese military front company connected. And here's the circle that I'm bringing in. You asked, what's the impact on Vancouver and its real estate? A major investor that my reporting and documentation connected to the Chinese Communist Party and the highest levels of organized crime in Hong Kong purchased a major portion of central Vancouver in the late 1980s. And when I say major, 20 to 30%. So this is major condo development. They got a great deal on it. The very same individual that I'm sure in the coming weeks we'll hear his name in press conferences from Donald Trump. Maybe I don't need to name his name right here, but the entity is called Hutchison Whampoa. It's a major global shipping entity with ports around the world. And look, the concerns are that a lot of drug precursors come in through those entities and ports. And again, I'm drawing the connections between Chinese state activity, organized crime activity, and American geopolitical concerns. And essentially, a lot of people would say Vancouver has been captured by those types of entities.
So I want to get into the drug side of things a little deeper. Before I do, though, one of the aha moments I had when reading your book was, and this is the book, Willful Blindness. And I've got this thing dog-eared like crazy. But one of the aha moments for me was realizing, like, when you're writing about triad members, which are essentially sophisticated organized crime organizations. You're writing about triad members, and then you're writing about Hong Kong business tycoons with legitimate businesses in Asia. And then you're writing about sometimes either CCP members or their family members. And at one point you sort of tied it all together, and I realized these aren't necessarily different people. Like you can be all four of those things at once.
Absolutely. It's something that I believe, if we want to call it the American mind, the Canadian mind, the average investor, the average citizen needs to get their mind around. For whatever reason, when we think about cartels, in Mexico or Colombia, people have the image of, just the most vicious brutality, which is true, but they're not seeing the sophistication of the business persons at the top. And if you put that into China, it's even more sophisticated, even more government connected. My sources indicate there's no government or regime in the world with more sprawling, intricate connections to global organized crime than the Chinese Communist Party. And so I talked about this individual that Mr. Trump will be concerned about in Panama. Yes, this is a global banker, but documentation shows they have direct connections to what's called the Sun Yan Triad, one of the biggest and most sophisticated narco networks in the world. And yes, they have known deals with Chinese communist intelligence front companies, with officials. So it's the way to understand it for me is there's illicit finance going on around the world, and Beijing, which at the end of the day has control of everyone in that society and financial ecosystem, says, whatever you're doing, make it look good, fulfill our objectives, and you'll be okay. Do what you do it well. But if you don't fulfill our objectives, you're done in whatever line of work you're in. And that includes the highest, most sophisticated levels of organized crime. And the real mind blower here is it's coming out now in U.S. court files that these Chinese sophisticated transnational crime networks are literally the funders and facilitators of the Mexican cartels. So this is a very financial, logistical, supply chain logistics sort of arrangement. It has nothing to do with street crime that most people associate with, gangsterism.
It's with intention. I think that's the really mind-blowing thing. and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I can't resist. The Chinese Communist Party could stop the outflow, could stop the massive factory production of what they call precursors, the ingredients to make fentanyl.
Yes.
That gets shipped to BC and to Mexico. They could stop it, but they don't.
Exactly. And I call it, decentralized fentanyl trafficking. So they know that the US government will designate or sanction certain fentanyl precursors, and they will have a scientist, change a few molecules, and then it becomes a different precursor. But beyond that, they have distance and deniability because they ship the precursor to Vancouver, which becomes a global hub of production. And you have little, drug presses scattered throughout the city. And they're not little anymore. They're super labs, as they call them, in British Columbia, where it's Mexican cartels and Chinese triads running it. And indeed, one of the politicians that's now a little bit under the gun with President Trump, it's BC Premier David Eby. He understands the fentanyl problem so well that he just came out in a report in Canada's Maclean's magazine and said, using his voice, we were ready to work with the American officials because we know in British Columbia we have a huge problem with Mexico and China shipping fentanyl precursors into our province. So there are Canadian leaders that know they've got a deep problem. And I guess their argument is that whether wrongly or rightly, President Trump has said enough is enough. You're getting tariffs, and then let's see if you can fix the problem.
So let me just make sure everyone is with us in terms of the flow of drugs, because I want to make it clear this is a huge problem for BC and the neighborhood in BC that has been blighted. Downtown East Side.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. Like I want to make it clear that this is a North American problem. And so from your book, my understanding, I'll repeat your words to you, paraphrased, right? The path of the drugs, fentanyl precursors, the raw ingredients to make fentanyl is shipped from factories in China. It's shipped to BC and Mexico for the most part.
Yes.
There it gets turned into fentanyl and then turned into pills in large part. And then those pills are distributed across Canada, across the United States, across Mexico. That this is where the fentanyl-linked deaths across North America are coming from. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. I've got one of those big world maps on my wall behind me, and yes, southern China is where a lot of the precursors are, concentrated. They ship to Vancouver, which, remember, I'm asserting has had ports captured by these very same shipping tycoons from Hong Kong, who also own assets in Panama, who also run ports up and down the west coast of Mexico. So if I know that your viewers are following, the path of those precursors getting into North America goes through those weak points where Canada, in fact, has removed port police from Vancouver. And I'm saying these tycoons that own much of the real estate city have port facilities. So the precursors go in. They have these super labs or decentralized small labs across Vancouver. Pills are pressed up and then transshipped. Let's focus on Vancouver, to Australia, to Japan, down to Mexico even, and come into the United States in various different ways across Canada. So I would say in the Western Hemisphere, Vancouver, British Columbia, west coast of Mexico, and Panama would be those major access points we need to be concerned about. And I'll just end by saying, with that mind map, let's bring it back to the Vancouver model of money laundering. All the fentanyl precursors, being the transactions happening in Vancouver, those funds are piling up in basements in the city, And then we have ultra wealthy officials, gangsters, gamblers flying in from Hong Kong, laundering those cash proceeds, and that money, remember, is sort of zipped back from a bank account in China right back to the fentanyl producer's bank account. And that's that dirty money loop that keeps the fentanyl going and flowing.
So fentanyl, essentially, I mean, the only conclusion I could come to, and I think you came to the same conclusion, is that fentanyl is a weapon. That it is a weapon in the war against the West on the part of the CCP. I mean, I just don't know how else to describe it.
I believe so. You know, the chronology at the time my book was first published, one of the memorable quotes from one of the, I would say, law enforcement and geopolitical experts that I can't name told me in a memorable quote, what's happening in Vancouver, all these people openly dying in the downtown streets. This is the opium war in reverse. So remember, China still bears a big axe and grudge over, what happened with opium being run in by some colonial networks to China and the damage it did there. And yeah, they feel it's time to pay back, I believe. And so when I wrote my book, I was relying on these high level, intelligence enforcement sources saying, there's the concern that Beijing is complicit in this activity and it becomes like a warlike activity. It's both immensely profitable for Beijing. It's involved in, their mercantilism of moving products around the world. Fentanyl precursors are a big part of that. But the objective of seeing deaths, in America, they want that. That's what I was being told. And so in my book, I said, that's a very strong theory. I'd like to see the documents. And after my book was published, essentially we have US congressional studies saying this is what the American government believes at the classified level. And indeed, even now publicly, they have found value-added taxes for fentanyl precursor producers in China. As long as Chinese merchants ship those precursors elsewhere and don't sell fentanyl in China, they're being paid to do it. It doesn't get any more intentional than that, I'd say.
I started getting interested in this because I do have a little bit of an axe. Well, I definitely have an axe to grind, and just wanted to understand how and why this was happening and why people were dying. An acquaintance of mine, a friend of my wife's, I watched her daughters grow up. We would see them once a year. They would come for a couple of days while they were visiting for vacation. And so I watched this little girl go from age 5 to college, right? And I would see her once a year. I'd get a nice little snapshot of her life. And she went to college in Portland, Oregon, and died of fentanyl. This kid was not the profile of a drug using. I don't know the details, but I have to imagine she probably did what 75% plus of college students do at one point when they're in college, a little experimentation of something, having no idea that she was going to come close to dying from it. I mean, what is it going to take before we wake up? Because there's so much money involved. Is that you made that so clear? There's so much money involved, and that money corrupts. And so it's not the politicians that are going to fix this. Maybe President Trump is on it. I hope he is. It sounds like it. But there's others that you bring up in the book that just willful blindness. They turned a blind eye. So what's it going to take to fix this?
I could talk for a long time, but I mean, just on the personal level, you're right. I've heard from people, let's say at a high level in sort of the more intelligence world, that say there's been a slow reaction because whether we're talking about, the Eastern Coast establishment that go to the Ivy League schools, they didn't have the feeling that this was, touching them. That is, in the Rust Belt, has for years been suffering from the opioids. And now it's starting to, as you say, filter up to that level where your A student daughter could go away and, by accident, pop a party pill under some pressure that's laced with this stuff. I remember the most talented sports writer in Vancouver when I was there in my newsroom had a party situation and overdosed, and just something that, you would never see it coming. And so, yeah, I having lived in Vancouver, sorry, I get a little emotional, but
yeah, it's
from
heartbreaking.
the financial side of it, from being a reporter that walked through what I call the death zone of the downtown east side, which is growing. Anyone, go to YouTube, go to Google and Google downtown east side, and you'll be shocked at the third world and worse conditions. And you're right, it's now spreading throughout cities. And so I guess as a reporter or as a person, I just could never get a thick skin over my my heart or my mind to what that is. And so what's it going to take? Look, I have a deep concern that's only growing, that law firms at a high level across North America are involved in securities and sort of laundering activity for this, what I call a growing class of sophisticated organized crime that is connected to the street crime, but is also connected to sort of medical marijuana or, pharmaceuticals. And it's just all winding together into, a lot of people getting rich. And I think what's differentiated myself from other people that you would call a true crime writer is I get the financial side, and I'm saying a lot of politicians, a lot of lawyers, a lot of accountants, a lot of wealthy people are turning a blind eye to this. And a lot of people, in a city like Vancouver think they're getting ahead with that, that the home that keeps going up in value, but you're not getting ahead if suddenly, your neighbor's kid dies, right? It's
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not going away.
Sam, you used a term earlier that is a term of art called capture. Can you describe that concept and then taking it right through to full state capture?
I'm not partisan at all. There's problems on all sides of the aisle, but the concept of elite capture is essentially how Beijing has gone from being a regime that essentially, treats its own citizens like cannon fodder and, cheated its way into competing with the United States as global hegemon. They have been able to do that, win their way into world trade networks by targeting the very highest levels of political and business society around the world. So again, not political, but Prince Andrew, a story very recently in the United Kingdom, he had his pitch at the palace, but it came out that was sort of a vessel for a high-level Beijing operative involved in investment and sort of elite networks to apparently, allegedly cultivate Prince Andrew. The Hunter Biden story, which has tragic elements and was suppressed for a while, it's been revealed that Beijing intelligence, which I say with connections to corruption and organized crime, was going to Hunter Biden and certain people around him and making deals with regards to, oil trading around the world.
Lots of money at stake with that.
Lots of money. And again, I'm not political, but when you see people preemptively getting, pardons or what do you call it, immunity from the outgoing president, you have to ask what's going on there. So in Canada, I point to our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. We can read in a U.S. congressional report from 2023 of how reportedly a tycoon for Beijing paid a major sum to an entity close to Justin Trudeau. That would be an elite capture 101 operation. And so Beijing is targeting these elites around the world. And at the end of the day, what do they want? They want they want to have beneficial trade relationships. They want to not be criticized for a genocide in Xinjiang. They want to not be criticized for subsuming Taiwan. That's what elite capture is all about. And as I've revealed, it's about undermining our own democracies by trying to place puppets into our parliaments, legislatures, and houses of representation.
Your prime minister recently resigned. Does anything change?
That's
and was this the cause, do you think?
Some people have told me that my exposure of Justin Trudeau's party, which is the Liberal Party of Canada, it's turning a blind eye, as I confidently assert, to elite capture. And our government, turning a blind eye to money laundering, I believe, connected to Beijing, is a part of, the negatives that accrued to his party and his leadership. And so he was in a weak position, partly due to the reporting that, I did. But I won't minimize. He had a lot of scandals that bubbled up before that. I think he and his party's exposure to Chinese influence is the worst scandal by far, and it's still unraveling. Did Donald Trump, see weaknesses there and give a nudge? I don't know what's going on, in Trump's administration and the intelligence he has, but I can say with confidence that even the Biden administration, the American government for years has had concerns about Trudeau's lack of diligence with regards to Chinese infiltration. Let's call it what it is. So that's a problem. And what happens now? Well, Trudeau, nominally he's stepped down, but an emerging story is that he and his close aides do appear to be sort of trying to retain a grip on power, even though 77% of Canadians polled say they want an election. They're so concerned. Mark Carney, who I'm sure, familiar with your viewers, a very elite banker, appears to be, let's just call him very much supported by Trudeau and Trudeau's circle. And that's where we are now.
Resisting China, it is possible. And you wrote about how Australia took a very different tack, which is pretty impressive because Australia, I would have to think China is Australia's biggest trading partner, given proximity. What did Australia do differently that maybe has put them in a better position to fight this onslaught of money and pressure?
It's a story that's kind of near and dear to my heart, but there's a journalist named John Garneau and Nick McKenzie in Australia. And around 2016, 2017, they started to reveal these explosive stories that an Australian senator had warned a Chinese operative who's a real estate developer that as an agent, they were under Australian intelligence surveillance. So that looks like something appearing to be almost traitorous. The other pieces of the story were there were individuals, one in particular, who's cited in an FBI investigation for paying sort of a United Nations bribery, transfer. This person, the couple of people I'm talking about, real estate developers, my information directly associated to Chinese organized crime and the major funders of all three Australian political parties. And so these brave journalists exposed this. They told Australian citizens, the danger here is your government is being bought. This is elite capture. These are Chinese operatives. And the Australian government responded. They came up with new laws around treason. They came up with foreign agent registries. And the journalists were successfully sued, even though FBI documents in some ways, confirmed their reporting, which is another, concern of mine. But Australians government, they responded to willful blindness. And I read this in Canadian government documents. They pushed back on those elites that just wanted every dollar flowing between, Beijing and Canberra. And so now they have a semblance of laws to combat Beijing's interference. And I know that that's very appreciated in Washington and in the United States, which over the past 10 years has just rapidly flipped the switch on the understanding of what's occurring when you're doing business with China. You're not doing business. They're undermining your society and your financial networks, your IP. It's just a complete and total capture operation.
This story is so fascinating. And I can't recommend Willful Blindness enough. But this story is ongoing. I mean, it's evolving every day, every week. How do how do viewers follow you and learn more about you and keep up with this story? Because I think it's essential to fixing it. Knowledge is power here, truly.
Thanks for that, Ed. And, when the book in 2021 came out in Canada at #1 in Amazon, I knew that, I had a model for sort of deep and detailed narrative reporting that people in finance, people everywhere, people across society were liking the book. And I felt I could, eventually do the same thing. So I've started my own journalism investigative website called thebureau.news. And so that's platformed, that's my own domain. People can go there every week and they can read these continuing stories that deal with not just, Chinese hostile infiltration. Other nations are doing this too. And I write about it. Iran, India. This is the emerging story, I think, of our time, that there's sort of a war going on, that it's going towards, bombs, but it's already happening in financial systems, right? And so these are the stories I tell at thebureau.news. And I'm reporting, much more on America-focused stories, because I'll tell you this, for all America is the good leader of the world, and I believe always will be, if it stays the course in having a justice system. We know that there's lots of controversies, but in my experience, in comparison to other countries, transparency, enforcement without fear and favor is happening in the United States. I have access to those records, and so I'm able to write more stories US based now, I think, than even in Canada or elsewhere. And so that's my new direction.
That's great. So the Bureau .news. Okay. I will gladly do whatever I can to help distribute this story and this important work that you're doing. I have to think that this is sometimes dangerous for you. I mean, you were picking on some incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful people who have been associated with not just death indirectly because of drugs, but murders. I mean, this is what you're doing is incredibly brave. So I want to thank you publicly for that. And if there's ever anything that I can do to help you further get the story out, I am a phone call away.
Thanks, Ed. I mean, it means so much to me to hear that from Americans like you. It tells me that I'm doing something well here, and the message is resonating.
Thank you, Sam. Good luck to you, and keep up the great work at the Bureau.
Thanks.